Hello and welcome to this session on poetry in translation. Yesterday, if you remember, we stopped with the reading of Dilip Chitra's Father Returning Home. So what we would do today is go back to the poem, unpack it in terms of literary analysis, and we will come back to the regional element at the second half of the section. So Dilip Chitra's Father Returning Home has been translated by the poet himself. Now, what I would like to do is ask a couple of questions in relation to this poem and see what the answers are. And I have a few tips for analyzing poetry with me, and I want to do this exercise. The first question is trying to figure out the meaning of the poem. What is the meaning of the poem? Sanchar, what do you think is the meaning?
In basic sense, I believe that it starts with something like painting a character sketch of a father. But more than that, it's basically a class character, like who is belonging from the more commonplace, a middle class man with his own frustrations, with his own hopes and hopelessnesses. So he's a man between the topsy and turvy and everything. So he's going through life and he's almost at the fag end of his life. So from a distant camera perspective of his son's eyes, we look at the father's character who comes back home.
Yeah.
And it's so vivid, like the camera picture is so vivid that it seems like he's basically painting the pains and the joys of his father's character.
Yeah.
So how he becomes connected to the society, how he's unable to connect with society, even that place where he's trying to merge himself in spite of his not liking the society around. So how that old man has tried to cope up with the needs and necessities of life in order to carry on a future for himself as well as his family.
Right.
It's very deep in the sense, but the language is very easy, I feel. But there are certain profound quotations, like dropping out of a word from a sentence, or when he sits back, lays back himself and thinks about the estrangement of the modern world.
Yeah.
So I think there are much profound things which are there inside the poem. So
Okay. I think the first tip should have been, how do you summarize? What is the content rather than the meaning? Meaning is a deeper level, right? So I just realized that, when you first look at the poem, you just try to get what does it mean? Like, what is the summary? It's about a father who's returning home.
Yeah.
That's it. The title kind of tells you that a father is returning home, and that return is seen through the eyes of a son or a daughter, right? You have suggested son, and yesterday when we were reading this poem, the instinctive response in terms of my understanding of the speaker, right, was of a female voice, of a daughter. It's a subconscious kind of conflation of what I think is the identity of the speaker, and the reasons I was thinking as to why did I think it is a female, because there's no indication whatsoever to suggest the gender of the speaker, right? So we have a speaker looking at the father, right, who's returning home. What makes me think this is a female speaker is that the estrangement, right? The estrangement between the father and the children, which is referred to in this line. His sullen children have often refused to share. His sullen children, unhappy children, the children who are sulking, right? And it's my father. The very first line says, my father. So this speaker is part of the brood of that man, right? And I thought, okay, alienation, sullenness, the distancing effect is usually on the part of the daughters, which is why I probably thought, but it could as well be a son. We have other examples in Indian poetry of sons being estranged from fathers, and the best example that I could think of at this moment is A.K. Ramanadan's Obituary, right? So there we have a male voice, isn't it, who is kind of looking at his father and the kind of debts and other stuff that he has left behind for the son, the heir to kind of sort out and look after, right? Especially the daughters. So we do not know for certain whether it's a male or a female child who is looking at the father figure. So I'm still with Sanjar's response to the poem. The other thing is, we don't get a sense of joy on the part of the father. I don't personally see it. Maybe he kind of maybe, I don't know whether this is a stretch, but maybe he kind of enjoys this sullenness himself in some way, like, he enjoys, somebody could possibly enjoy the pessimism, like the bleakness, the gloom, the mundaneness, that kind of feeling could be there. I don't know, but since you mentioned that, that
we can interpret it on multiple layers.
Yeah, multiple layers. So there isn't very explicit sense of joy, but there is perhaps an attitude which has become used to these kind of misery that we kind of get through this narrative. So it's, if you want to summarize it, when you begin looking at a poem, you just summarize it and see what the content is. So it's a father returning home. The second tip here for getting into this poem is think about the imagery. Imagery is a common technique used by poets to get their meaning across. So what are the images in this poem? The mind pictures. Images are nothing but mind pictures, right? The mind pictures. Which images have been chosen? And are these images related, connected to one another? Is there one overall image, or are there several different images used? What feeling is given by which image? Evaluate the poet's images. So let's go back to the poem and see what are the kind of mind pictures, images we get. And the first one, it's a very interesting image, is that of a sentence.
Yeah.
Right? I can see him getting off the train like a word dropped from a long sentence. Right? So you immediately imagine a page with a lot of text, or maybe one statement at least, and a word being kind of dropped out of it, right? That sense of being displaced, forcibly dislocated in some way from the rest of the world, right? That image comes to you when you read that phrase, like a word dropped from a long sentence. Can you look at the poem and see what other images do you get? I mean, in fact, the entire poem is a kind of a very, very powerfully imagistic rendering of a man, traveling, getting off, walking, crossing the railway line, getting to his house, drinking wheat. It's very powerful in that way. I mean, the entire poem. But within that kind of sketch, you use the word sketch. Within that, what other, word pictures or mind pictures do you get? What do you think, Mithila?
In this poem, the poet wants to emphasize the fact that his father is very old, and instead of using a refrain saying that, like when you look at other poems when they want to emphasize something, the common thing that they use is refrain. But here, to emphasize the fact that he's old, you find a lot of adjectives and images that are that points out to his old age. So you have this what's like evening train, this yellow light, and then a grey platform. And and even you hear he says about this graying hair, and then this unseeing eyes again is like that.
Let me just go back to that one point both of you have raised, which is that the idea that this man is old, right? What makes you think that he is old? What are the indications, or what is the mood in this poem which tells you that he is most likely to be old? Can you pick on anything concrete in the poem?
I think that this old which is focused here in this entire poem, like it may be a far-stretched idea, but somewhere or the other we feel that this old is not only the old of age.
Yes.
There is a predominating sense of a high exhaustion which is there. And this exhaustion is not only a biological exhaustion. This exhaustion is something which happens to a man when he goes on a regular habituated lifestyle and becomes existence for him becomes mundane. And so I feel that this poem, when he's talking about stale chapati, weak tea, these transferred epithets which are there. So the grey, as she mentioned out. So this the diction which he uses is also, since we are using images also, I think that this old, when he says that he comes back and there are grey hairs on his wrist when he is washing his head. So although we are biologically trying to track down that there is an old age man, but something in the dictionary is saying that there are a lot of more mundane elements that is pressing on him. So I think that's what it brings up.
You're right. So there are two things here. There are literal indications to suggest that he is, aging, and the very tangible, textual backup, if you need one, is that grain.
Exactly.
The grain aspect, his grain rest. So he's getting old. If he's not kind of doddering, he's old, right? And he cannot be doddering because he's hurrying onwards. He's hurrying. He has the capacity to hurry, to rush, right? Since he's nearing home, he rushes, right? He can physically move. When he's out of the train, he is in a hurry to get home. So that's one thing. So grain suggests some kind of, he's not in his prime. He's definitely not in his prime. The other thing is, the mood is created. I mean, that's another point here. What is the mood of the poem? The tone, mood is subjective, right? But the feeling that you get from the text. So that's the mood which is created. The mood of the poem is somber. It's almost as if, the person is in his decline. Yes. If not physically, mentally, right? Sure. Mentally, he's definitely declined, right? His unseeing eyes, I like that, the unseeing eyes, right? So it can suggest, if you want to be too literal, it can suggest that perhaps he has weak eyes, just as he's drinking weak tea, right? So unseeing eyes, the fact that he can no longer kind of physically take in all these details and process it, either because he's mentally fatigued or because he's kind of physically in his decline, right? So the unseeing eyes is also an interesting detail which can, go towards strengthening these two trajectories. The other one is the one that you pointed out, the yellowing light. The yellowing light is very interesting because yellow again suggests something which is not kind of bright and sparkly and excited. That kind of associated images don't come into that yellow melancholia, right? Is what is predominantly associated with that yellow color tone. What's the other one that you picked up? The graying hair on his wrist, and then the trembling, the idea of trembling at the sink. The tremble could be brought on by, a mental, fragility, right? Or it could be a physical, debilitation.
Which naturally comes with age.
Yeah. So there are two things. Anything else, Mridula, I want to pick up on further in terms of the imagery, right? And we see certain spaces. The space of the toilet. Right? The space of the toilet. He goes into the toilet to contemplate man's estrangement from a man-made world. So, I mean, it's very, it's spelled out for you what his trouble is. The poet just tells you, right, this is his trouble, which is why, he's feeling as if he's in a state of crisis. Mridula, what do you think?
Ma'am, there's this idea of anxiety on the poet's part, or the speaker's part, that his or her father is aging. And I don't know why this reminds me of the poem of Kamala Das, My Mother at 60, where she looks at her mother and she feels very sad that her mother is aging. So here also you can see that the Lipchitra is, or like the persona is worried that his or her father is aging, and he just can't take it.
Interesting. There are two characters, if you want to put it that way. There are two characters. One is the character of the father. He's the object who's being evaluated, right? Light being thrown on him. He's in the spotlight. But there's another character, the character of the child, or the adult, progeny of this man who's also there in the text, right? So both these characters are very well aware, right? They have very high, sophisticated way of looking at things. For example, this line that we just read, he goes into the toilet to contemplate man's estrangement. Look at the word estrangement. It's a technical term. It's a term. It's a content word which kind of very sharply tells us about the alienation between this man and the man-made world around him, the society, right? So, this speaker is able to understand and apply all these terms very appropriately. isn't it? And the speaker is also very sharp enough to know what is going on in the mind of the father, especially the last line. He will now go to sleep. Will now, not shall. No tentative, attitude towards what the father is, thinking about. He will now go to sleep, listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. So the speaker is able to get into the mind of the father and see the thoughts that are running through, right? So both these characters are highly literate and very sophisticated in their philosophical, understanding of their place in society, right? So the connection with Kamala Das is pretty interesting. Maybe we can bring that poem and put it as in a kind of an additional read for the students to kind of make comparisons. You can also bring obituary as other supporting text that you can kind of read in relation to this one. But what do you think about the static on the radio? I mean, it's a very auditory image, right? Static. That sound, you can hear that static. That noise when you read that line. What do you make of that image?
It just means that he's not really listening to the radio, or it's like this unseen eyes.
Yeah.
He's listening but not listening.
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
It talks about how much estranged he feels from the society, or like he doesn't really feel connected with anything, or just he's not bothered about what is happening.
Either it's a real static, this literal noise, or it's a metaphoric, figurative static, right? He's listening to the static. So there are two ways we can interpret it. Literally, it's some noise, perhaps the radio is not working, again, which it ties in with all the other idea of broken images, like, the bleak images. It can tie into that kind of, string of thought. Or it's a figurative static. As you say, he's not able to listen anymore, really listen. It's like those unseen eyes, you can connect it to that. So all his senses are failing in some ways. Only his thoughts seem to be very, very sharp. And the way he can fantasize, imagine about the past and the future, his ancestors and the grandchildren, he's able to kind of foresee, the future that's going to happen. And the last line of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. It's a very interesting image. A narrow pass, trying to get in, a nomadic people. What thoughts have you on that? Because there's a tip. Sorry to interrupt you. There's a tip which asks us to focus on the last lines. What is that?
Nomads entering.
It says the last line, pay attention to the last line of the poem, because the last line can either reveal what the poem is really about, or it can kind of take the poem in a different direction, right? It can take you away. So what does this last line do? Does it kind of give out the meaning in a more metaphoric way? Does it kind of recap, summarize the meaning in a metaphoric way? Or is it kind of trying to take you into an alternative route? What exactly is this last line doing? The last image, it's a very powerful image, right? It's a very, very beautiful image of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. Right.
It's actually very arguable, because when we were reading this poem back, so we wanted to see that since the last three lines are a little bit different from the others, it doesn't really connect with the preceding lines. I mean, the thought process won't be able to be related. So we were trying to look at the history of the literature, if he has an experience of migrating from some place to the other, and we found that it was not a really large-scale migration. He came from his native place from Vadodara to Mumbai. So we were and it was something in his childhood days which kind of, what can I say, influenced him a lot in his way of adapting to a new place and everything. So I felt that maybe somewhere, since he's talking about an old father, and if I consider the fact that the old father has come to a city in order to sustain his life and the generations after him, so he has migrated from a faraway place. And of course, with migration and dislocation, as you mentioned, so there is a lot of nostalgia and things which you get disconnected from a whole grassroots level thing. So genuinely there will be a crisis of identity, like where I am and where I was and where I am. So if we try to connect that thing, then maybe because of the historical route that he is going from Vadodara to Mumbai there only, I think that there can be a little bit of connection to the idea that there is some migrant experience which is also there.
Yes, there is a definite suggestion of this idea of migration, very beautifully put. You're trying to kind of connect it to the biographical, narrative of Dilip Chitra, the poet. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's a beautiful, effective context. And I was also trying to think about the other text, the other Marathi text that we read for the chorus, Gold from the Grave. There is an idea of migration there too, isn't it? The central character, Bhima, he comes from a village to the city to make it big, right? Or at least survive by dint of his hard work. And this is a Marathi poem, and translated by the speaker himself. I mean, the poet himself, Dilip Chitra, and that's also a Marathi text. So the idea of migration is part of that kind of region, I believe, and that's kind of brought to the surface through these kind of textual images and narrative. There it's very explicitly stated in that story, Gold from the Grave. He comes from the village to kind of make a living in the city, and it doesn't work out. He's in the suburbs, So and this guy is also a kind of perhaps a nomad. The father is perhaps a nomad, and perhaps he feels alienated because of that migrant experience. Perhaps he has more connections, more roots, just as Dhobatik Singh has with his village, right? And so perhaps that could be one of the reasons behind that alienation. And this is suburbia, right? Life is fast, and that's indicated through the train. And then everybody's silent. Suburbs slide past his unseeing eyes, and the line before that, silent commuters. There's no kind of connection among the people who are traveling together on the same train. People are usually very crowded on trains, but there is hardly any conversation, no connection, no bonds. However minimal that is, right? Even a minimal conversation. I mean, it's not unique to the suburban trains in India. Even in places like London or Singapore, where the tube or the metro is very, very common for a large mass of the population. There's hardly any conversation. Everybody would have a book or a newspaper. Somebody would be writing. They would be holding the rail by the one hand, holding a book on the other hand. There'll be silence.
And this is
utter silence.
Same thing why I feel that this poem is very stark in presenting what exactly a cityscape is.
Yes.
So if I take the character of a person who is coming from a village to or a rural area to sustain himself and establish himself in a city. So maybe he will do that financially, but the bigger question mark lies whether he will be ready to accept or internalize the exact culture where he's coming.
Yeah.
And in the later part of the future, that turns out to an estrangement because there will be an alienation and isolation from what he used to be. So there is a big pressure, not pressure, like he's getting a hit from what he used to believe in and what he is today. So this is a very interesting poem which charts an evolution of a person. So if we take that into consideration, like the conclusion about the migrant experience, then this poem will become a longer poem in course of time. Which he has kind of concretized in a small, what can I say, like a small area, and he has
So the alienation, the city produces, the city kind of creates that kind of structural alienation between individuals. I think we have a very lovely poem by S.K. as well on Mumbai, which you can pick up and use as kind of extra reading, where the same kind of alienation is felt through by the people moving about on the city. So I think that can also be an interesting comparison. The other thing I was wondering was the point that you raised about the lack of connectivity. I mean, the sense of alienation. It's also interesting to see. I mean, if you go back to that Marathi short story, I mean, we see Bhima most of the time on his own, with his thoughts. right? His mind voice is kind of, to put it very simplistically, is coming through and more apparent. It's on the surface, and most of the time he's with his thoughts, right? There's no kind of connection going from him to the rest of the village community, to the other kind of people in the society. He seems to be all by himself. Of course, he has his child and wife as the foremost dependents on his mind, but there is no other community that he can forge with anybody, right? So it's a very isolating kind of feeling that you can get in the story, don't you think? And the utmost that he interacts in an ironic way is that brutal fight with this pack of hyenas, right? And he can see all these villagers and other people as ghosts, right? So there's no kind of proper bond, a real genuine bond of exchange happening between this central character and the rest of us. And similar here with Dilip, and in that alienation has even seeped into the family.
Yes.
Right? Even the children cannot relate to the father cannot relate to the children. He worries about, he thinks about his ancestors and the grandchildren, but there is no kind of genuine, real bond of affection coming through that you can pick up on. We pick up on bleakness, we pick up on the idea of decline, we pick up on estrangement, alienation, but we don't pick up on, happy human emotions from this poem. And the other thing is apparently there's no reference to the central female character, the mother figure. The child is so focused on the father that there is no thought about the mother, which kind of lends more credence to what Sanjar kind of, thinks could be the gender of the speaker. So it's probably a son who feels more worried about or connected to the male figure rather than my kind of, idea that it could be a female, a well-informed female. But so it's a very interesting absence.
Yes.
The mother's absence is very interesting.
Yes.
Right? There's a little bit of reference in obituary to the mother, who's doing all these yearly rituals. Very minor reference there. And so the absence of the female from this kind of, suburban landscape, and even when we see that weak tea, I see him drinking the weak tea. Who prepares the tea, right? How does this tea come into his hand? Right? Who brings it? Is it the child or is it the mother? And there's a reference to chapati. It's italicized, right? And who makes that chapati? Why is it stale? What does it tell you about the domestic economy, right? Do they have to economize? What are the pressures? The financial pressures on the family. So that word is very, very interesting, that adjective stale.
Yes.
And you can also kind of, get the idea of smelling that staleness. Right? So it's a very sensory image.
Yes.
Staleness and weak tea, the lukewarm tea, or maybe there's more of water than of milk in that tea. Once again, making you think about the economy of that family, right? So who brings the tea? Who makes the stale chapati, right? She's perhaps indirectly present, but very, 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 very absent, and that makes you wonder further, and makes you think about Salma, right? Salma's perspective, where we see her in the midst of her domestic, chores, right? Can we quickly look at that poem? We have been talking about it so much, so can I grab yours here? Yeah, so cooking is kind of the second activity, right? After combing in the order of things. I stand outside and comb my hair. I cook topsy-turvy and eat thus too. I squat inverted to feed my child. Heels upward, I read my books. Upside down, I gaze at myself, terrified, stunned, and staring at me, a bat hanging right on the tree in the garden, right? So cooking is kind of spelled out as the second most important thing after, looking after your appearance. Right, for a woman, right? So it's very interesting, the things that are mentioned and the order in which they are mentioned. And in this poem too, we see that last set of lines, last set of words is an image, just as in Dilip Shutra, right? So there's a parallel there between father returning home and Salma's perspective in terms of the final imagery, the use of imagery to conclude the poems, right? There we have a bat, and here we have a nomad, right? Or a bunch of nomads entering a subcontinent through a pass. So the nomads, again, as we discussed, signifies migrant experience, and usually led by male leaders in search of fresh pastures, right? So moving here and there for survival, and the pitfalls of that kind of migrant experience is kind of given very specifically through this suburbia that we see in Father Returning Home, right? So I think we can think about other poems as well in terms of Dalip Chitra. What are the other poems that you can think of as parallels or as stark contrast to this one?
The parallels in the sense, the perspective by Salma, I think that if we can take that poem like a father returning home as a character portrait of a father, we can also take perspective as a character portrait of a mother. And like if we basically look at the gender perspective,
yes.
Most importantly, in spite of having the last 3 lines which are parallel, I also find that this particular image is like in perspective when she says this opposite, she uses this opposite phrases like topsy-turvy, upside down, then inverted, all these kind of things. In spite of everything, this poem also has a kind of a crisis. I believe like there is a kind of a pathos somewhere there where the mother is. Only difference is that the mother is of the female gender. She is basically putting forward her own experience. While in the other poem there is a second character who is doing that. So I think that in that sense both can be kind of companion pieces where it looks at the existential crisis, regular lifestyle of two persons in their what can I say, like in normality and something which is very difficult for them to experience, like the reality of life for each of them in each of their own places.
Yes, absolutely.
So I in that sense feel that both these poems can stand as how exactly life is for both these both two genders in that sense, with their own crisis, with their own topsy-turvy lifestyle and everything. So and both are kind of going through the experience and carrying on their survival. So I think both of them are pretty much profound in that sense.
Yesterday, Mritula, when we were talking about Kedarnath, saying where would I go, and Mritula was pointing out that that poem seems to tell that the person the character in the poem seems to be okay with the world. So there's a kind of being at comfort, and we thought about perspective and realized that she is not okay with the world.
Exactly.
She's never comfortable, and she is super aware of her position.
Exactly.
And her position she can only describe through this idea of figurative topsy-turviness, the idea of being inverted. So I think that's a very powerful image, more powerful than the narrative that we see in Dalip Chitra. And Dalip Chitra, it's a narrative. It's almost as if there's a story. Right? That's one of the tips that asks you to see if the poem has a storyline. Right? How does it kind of begin? What is the middle point? How does it end? And what is the function of what is the function of characters and so on. So if you look at this one, there is a narrative. I mean, it's very episodic. Like she mentions the things that she does: standing, cooking, feeding, reading. Right? Standing, cooking, feeding, reading, and yet it's all very, very upside down. Like she is very aware of the fact that she is not in a normal position. But here, there is a sense of normalcy, right? Yes, the father is alienated. Yes, the son can see that, right? Or the daughter can see that the father is having some kind of crisis. Despite that, it's a routine. The father is able to move through all these spaces of the city, right? He is able to kind of, leave traces.
Yes.
Right? We were talking about traces. He's able to leave traces, right? He has possessions, he has chapatis, he has chapels, he has a bag which is bursting with books, right? But even when she reads the book, Salma's speaker, when she reads the book, she feels as if she is doing it upside down. And Sanjay, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, this is very gender, like the male and the female world, right? One is a normal world, the other is a topsy-turvy world. Mridula, what else can you see as being very distinctive in relation to these poems?
Ma'am, when you said that in this father returning home, you said that here in the persona feels that he is attached to this world. He has a mark in this world. In the same way, you can see that in this poem, Where Would I Go? Also, he leaves his, he has a mark, like he has a possession. But when it comes to this perspectives, although she is a part of that world, she feels alienated because she doesn't have any say, and she's sad about it. But in these two poems, Where Would I Go? He's part and parcel of the society and the community, and he's okay about it. But she's not. Here in this poem, you can see a very conflicting imagery, because he does not know whether he should be, because it is not written in the perspective of it is written through the eyes of the narrator. We don't know what the father is exactly feeling, but in the other two poems,
very good.
you understand what is exactly happening with them.
Yes, very good point. It's a very important structural point, Mridula. I mean, we kind of look at the father through the eyes of the progeny, right? The child, the descendant. But as you pointed out, we really literally don't know what exactly the father is, going through. The son perhaps rightly assumes all these, philosophical attitudes. Right, but in Salma's case, the speaker is very assertive. She is a victim. She thinks that she is not allowed to be in a normal position. She's aware of the fact that she's in a topsy-turvy position, but she's also very assertive. I agree. Look at the statements like "I stand," "I cook," "I squat." There's a kind of, in terms of the tone, there's an assertiveness. Right, there's a forthrightness, like it's very forthright. I know it's a forthrightness is the right way to put it. There's an idea of being very forthright and assertive. The tone is slightly aggressive, maybe, and there is look at the choice of the words: terrified, stunned, staring at me. There's an element of kind of rebellion, maybe. Right, the staring at me and acknowledging that stare from the bat. The bat perhaps is terrified, the bat perhaps is stunned, the bat perhaps is like also angry, staring at me, hanging ripe on the tree in the garden, like very contradictory kind of images, right, coming through. So you're right in pointing out the structural difference between these two poems. As Sanjay pointed out, it's a domestic world that we see. And I also thought that we get a sense of being confined. In Salma, she's within doors, right? Perhaps able to see the garden. That's as far as the eyes can go. But here in Dilip Chitra, Father Returning Home, we can see the father navigating the suburban space. Of course, he's alien. He's able to not see things, but at least he's out there in the open, like the birds that fly and come back. Right, and like the spirit of Kedarnath's speaker in Where Would I Go, who's allowed to fly with the birds and come back. She is not. Right, she's like that back, like hanging in the garden there, right, frozen in that particular moment, and tied to the domestic world. But she's trying to kind of get at the real world through the books that she reads. So the books are the kind of gateways into outside worlds, into multiple worlds. Which kind of gives her some vistas of the public sphere, right? So this is how we can connect all these poems that we study for this course, and wherever possible, I want you to think about the regional flavors. So the idea of migrancy itself could be connected more overtly to that particular domain. We need to do further research to kind of pinpoint and say, yes, the migrant experience is greater in this region of India and lesser elsewhere. So that could be a regional flavor. right? Chapati, the choice of that kind of food on a regular basis is very peculiar to that region. And chappals, I think we use that very common. It's an Indianism, I think, rather than belonging to a particular region. So there's a conflation of Indianisms, and as well as regional flavors that you can get here and there in these poetry. Right? Anything further? I think we have a little more research. We'll come back as we look at other texts for this course. Thank you for your valuable thoughts. Thank you.